Okay, that's good to know. So getting buy-in on innovation is definitely something that we all need to do if we want to innovate. You generally have to obviously convince the people with money and decision-making authority that trying new things is part of the job. So that's what we'll focus on today. I entitled this session "Learning." The so what factor of innovation. And just, to summarize kind of the headline level here, in my experience, I consider myself an innovator and I get excited about doing new things for the sake of doing new things. It brings me enjoyment. The journey is important. It's fun. It sort of gives me fulfillment in my job. But I find that the people who are in decision-making roles for budgets or policies or structures or setting up new staff positions, they want to know, so what? They don't want to just know that you're doing something new. They want to know what you're going to get from it. And for me, the safest things you can promise that you will get from innovation is that you will advance learning, right? You will know something that you didn't know before. So that's kind of the frame that I wanted to have here. Let me just tell you a little bit about me and my job and what I do, and we'll kind of keep this as interactive as we can. I think the chat is the easiest way. I can't see how many people are on, but it's many. So we'll just sort of take it from there. So essentially, I am the team leader of the United Nations Development Program Accelerator Lab Network. And essentially, what that is a network of 91 social innovation labs that span 115 countries, mostly in what we call the global south. So these are areas where the United Nations has poverty alleviation programs, programs to combat the spread of diseases, investment programs, et cetera. So you'll see we're not in the US in any of the US states, but we are very present in Africa and Asia and Latin America and the Middle East. So essentially, each one of these labs is a team of 3 people. We usually have a data scientist of some form who helps us capture new forms of data. Very often, we try and glean information from social media data or mobile phone data or satellite data, and we need the people who know how to deal with unstructured data sets. So that's why we have a data scientist. We also have someone who's an ethnographer or a sociologist, or maybe has a journalist background. And their job, they have a really fun job. Their job is to look for innovations, knowledge, and practices of the men and women we're trying to help. And then we have a third role in each of these innovation labs inside the United Nations, and that's the head of experimentation. So this head of experimentation takes the intelligence from data science and ethnography and designs tests that advance our learning on what works and what doesn't. So that's basically the spread. These labs are embedded inside the United Nations Development Program, which is a large United Nations agency. It's 17,000 people. We have about a $5 billion a year budget. We operate in 170 countries. So it's a big bureaucracy. And essentially what we've done is we've embedded these innovation teams in these 91 countries to help the organization advance its mission, right? Which is keeping people out of poverty, providing clean and affordable energy. This is becoming more and more of an issue because even places that have electricity are experiencing cuts. Maybe some of you out in are also seeing this. Certainly those who are close to Ukraine are feeling it. But all over the world, there are energy cuts that we're seeing all over the place. So we've got a very wide mandate. Part of it's about gender equality. Part of it's what we call governance, which means institutional support for Ministry of Justice, Ministries of Interior. That's what we operate in around the world. So this is why I don't know any of the U.S. acronyms, because even though I am American, I've never worked in the public sector in the U.S. So I'm a little bit in my own headspace there. But just giving you that background, sort of where I'm coming from. So essentially, our theory of change, and this is where I want to hear a little bit from you. So our theory of change, what happened was, basically, we started to see that the change on the outside of our organization was faster than the change on the inside of the organization. And this is never a good sign. um, so essentially, we have floods, we have droughts, we have people who can't find work in rural areas coming to urban areas. We have the rise of violence extremism. We have all these emerging factors. We have enormous opportunity, of course, from, technology and, sort of new economic opportunities. But the pace of change is just so fast. Our organization wasn't digitally savvy enough. It wasn't close enough to the people we try and serve. We weren't learning enough from them, which is why we set up this network of social innovation teams inside the organization. So the idea was, we hired a bunch of people. It's about 300 people globally inside our organization. They're mostly new to the organization. So they fight a lot of, resistance battles sometimes with the core business. But their intention is to accelerate learning. So help us learn how, what works and what doesn't in reducing poverty, in Africa, or ensuring energy access, or ensuring gender equality in primary school and secondary school, et cetera. Tell us actually what works, and to test out new ways of doing things. And all of this learning is meant to help us adapt to this change, the pace of change, which we saw increasing. Our overall kind of goal is to achieve what are called the Sustainable Development Goals. These are sort of promises of all the governments of the world, including ours, on kind of results-based targets that they will reach by 2030. Before the pandemic, things were sort of moving in the right direction, but too slowly. The pandemic threw everything very off course. So we're seeing global poverty rising for the first time in 25 years. But the important thing is, these are an accountability measure. They are promises from governments, and so our main mission is to help achieve those sustainable development goals. They have a whole list of, 169 targets and 227 indicators to measure progress on them. So it's kind of it's like a big results framework for the world, essentially. So what I wanted to kind of hear from you a little bit is, our mission was to create not just a network of social innovation labs, but to create a learning network. And what I wanted to know from you is, where do you find new knowledge to advance your organization's goals, or the mission of your department or unit or team? How do you and your teams collectively learn? So if you want to give that some thought, or just pop some ideas in the chat, we can get a sense of sort of how you learn. Lots of trainings, Martin, that we go throughout the year. That is definitely the case. We have Chandra says we've got an informal network of change agents. We shared information, have a book club. What a brilliant idea. I love that. National conferences, reading blogs to hear about new tools. Hopefully also writing blogs to share what you're learning. Looking at what's working in the private sector. Yes, we do that too. Training, peer reviews of other jurisdictions give us a lot of ideas. Conferences. Yes, the public impacted communities. Brilliant, Trace. State priorities and collaboration with federal grantees. Requesting and analyzing specific data to better understand what the needs are and where. And what I'm wondering about, as you use these different learning methods, do you feel like it's easy? I mean, have you had successes in implementing that learning or putting that learning into action? It's hard. It's hard. It's very hard. I think it's one of those things where sort of if you go to a training or a conference, you can get all fired up about something and come back and you're just learning it too. So it's very hard for you to sort of share that with others. And it's even harder to build that in structurally to what you do because, you know, everyone's already busy. About a 50-50 success rate. I'd say that's really good, Chandra. It's really good. Okay, some success here with targeted resource development, Kelly, getting the service and supports in place where they're needed. Fabulous. Excellent. Yeah, so I mean, basically what we sort of, the way we pitch it is basically we're trying to say, you know, I know in the 90s it was very popular. This might be, you know, when some of you were very young or even born, but for those of us who were working then, the concept of knowledge management was very popular in the 90s. And the idea was if you document knowledge and make it accessible, then people can apply the best practices that have been learned from one place to another. And what we find essentially is that in this moment of planetary crisis, you know, whether you feel it through inflation or energy cuts or, you know, the inability to re-gear the economy towards greener growth, or the way that, you know, the rich keep getting richer and the poor, the divide with the poor gets bigger, whatever it is, there's not really a lot of best practices that you can copy paste from one place to another. So the way we frame it is, listen, if we want to make progress, we need experimentation and learning and exploration, and we need to speed up this learning. You know, the general state of the world needs us all to catch up with, as smart as we are. We're smarter than the situation we're in, and we really want to kind of create a mandate for experimentation by saying best practices don't always exist. And even if they do, you can't necessarily apply them to different contexts, which is how we encourage exploration and experimentation and innovation. Indeed, in many topics, Brett, that is a dearth of best practices or evidence-based research. And what I find is it's sometimes, even if you have the evidence, it's hard to get people to listen, right? We always assume that with more information, we will make better decisions, and that's way harder than we might imagine in practice. So shifting to talk about innovation a little bit. This is a little bit overwhelming as a graphic, but I'm doing it for an effect here. So we often think about innovation as doing new things. And you can see in this Venn diagram a lot of new methods or innovation methods, right? So collective intelligence, citizen science, maybe some of you have used some of these, artificial intelligence, behavioral insights, systems thinking, right? There's the fun thing about innovation is it never stops evolving, right? There's always new innovation methods. And again, what I find is that while I personally am attracted to and am excited by, you know, what can we do with, let's say, sense making? I don't know if any of you have used that. In order to create meaning and make sense of fast evolving situations, my boss looks at me like their eyes glaze over and they don't know what I'm talking about or care about that at all. So this is a very useful graphic, I think, because this is from my colleague, Bas Lurs, who used to be at Nesta, which is an innovation charity in the United Kingdom. And essentially what he's done is he's tried to organize this emerging practice of innovation methods based on what they help you do, right? The so what factor. So, you know, often getting new kinds of data visualization, data ethnography or something helps you understand reality, right? Often visual thinking, open policy making, hackathons, these kinds of things empower people. Or, you know, behavioral insights, using games, gamification, what they call regulatory sandboxes. These are different ways to create solutions. And technology, whether it's sensors or cryptocurrencies or blockchain or what have you, often are kind of helping you enable action. So I find that while I'm attracted to the innovation methods, my boss would much rather hear about what they get from it, right? So when I'm trying to get buy-in for innovation, I talk more about, okay, here's how we can understand reality in a way that catches up with the pace of change, right? Here's how we can empower people, right, through collective intelligence. Here's, with behavioral insights, we might be able to shape reality, or with some artificial intelligence or virtual reality or what have you, we might be able to enable action. So it's a really useful graphic. I'll share these slides and you can definitely look at it. But the point I'm trying to make here is, instead of thinking about innovation as doing new things, I find for the purposes of getting buy-in into innovation, it's better to think about innovation as learning. So this is where I have this formula for trying to get buy-in into innovation. And it's not an easy task. And I find I work with a lot of communications, colleagues who run the communications on what we do. And I sort of developed this formula in a way along the way to help them know how to describe what we do. So essentially, the formula is this. You sort of say, okay, I want to test out, and then you describe some new way of working. Maybe it's artificial intelligence, maybe it's behavioral science. So I want to test this out in order to enable action, understand reality, create solutions, empower people. And then so that we can learn what works and what doesn't. And you can make these as specific as you need to. So I want to test out this new way of working to create this new value on a problem we have so that we can learn something, is kind of the basic formula. So an example of this would be, I want to test out behavioral science. You go to your boss and you say, I want to test out behavioral science in order to understand why people don't pay their taxes on time, so that we can learn which interventions would work best, which interventions actually should we scale. This is one way of thinking about it. And again, you can choose your own adventure here, and not all problems can be solved with behavioral science, but the point I'm trying to make is, I find it's better to get buy-in on innovation if you talk about, yes, the new thing you want to do, so that you can understand this, that, or whatever, in order to then be able to take action at scale. So we'll play a little more music here, and try this out. Take a piece of paper, and if you've got an innovation that you're trying to get buy-in on right now, try applying this formula. And I've included this Venn diagram, a simplified version of the Venn diagram, just as a cheat sheet. No need to use it. Kate, did you want to come in?
I just wanted to ask a quick question before we pop the music back on.
Sure.
One, this is fantastic. At some point, I'd be curious to hear how you came up with it. It looks
trial and error, and error.
And then the second was, as people go to write it down, you said if there's an innovation that you're working to try, does it have to? I think sometimes the innovation people maybe think is a new technology, but can it be just like, I want to talk to the call center to better understand users so that we can,
Absolutely.
Okay, great.
Yeah, any new way of working does not need to be technology. Definitely innovation is way more than technology. I think often we lump it into that. But yeah, so take a piece of paper and just try this, because it's sort of, if you want to get buy-in on an innovation or a new way of working, give this a shot. This is, by the way, an experiment. So this is the first time I've done this with a group. So you all can let me know if it works. And I will play you some music, so you can have that in the background. By the way, this use of music is something that we do with our lab network all the time. We have we've got like 300 people in, 90 countries or what have you. So every Tuesday at 7 a.m. New York time, unfortunately, because that's the time that works for everybody, we meet with the whole lab network, and we always have a DJ of the call. So the person who chairs the meeting is the DJ, basically. So they have to have an intro and an outro, and then if we ever do collective work, we play music while people are in the middle of it. It's a really good practice to make this virtual life many times better because then you can kind of engage in music. And of course, we're dealing with people with from many different countries, so it's a lot of different kinds of music, which is really fun. So does anyone want to share their pitch, their sort of attempt to get some buy-in on something that you're trying to do? We can, I guess, Kate, we can either do by opening the mic, right? Or in the chat.
Yeah, I think we can ask folks to toss what they have in the chat or what they were working on, and see what comes in. I'm going to add in one that I heard from a user interview 2 weeks ago.
Oh, cool. Oh, it's going to be a lot at once. Okay. So Chandra, I want to test out using fundamental maps or mapping operations to visualize what our department does so we can learn how to align performance and focus on how we add value to our customers. Fantastic. Fantastic. So Kate, this is the one that you mentioned. From a user interview, I want to test out talking to people who handle claims in the call center in order to understand the problems that state residents have when they fill out our online form, so we can see what's working and what's not. Exactly. Yeah, talking to people at the front line is critical, really, really critical. And especially if something that this new way of working, that you're trying to do, I find the best thing to do is start small, but depending on the level of permission you have to do things differently, you probably need to kind of build confidence in that new way of working, even if you're testing it out on a very small basis. And you're probably better off just, trying to bring people in from the very beginning, also so they can sort of feel excited about it as they go. Anyone else want to share theirs? Share their pitch, get feedback on it.
They will not be graded.
No, it's really more of an art than a science. I'm making it look like it's a science with this like fancy math here, but it's definitely it's not easy. It's not as easy as it looks. It's one of those things that looks like it's really simple, but it's not. Okay, Chelsea, I want to test out making online filing / credit card transactions mandatory in order to modernize our services for our customers so we can make it easier / faster, less human employee errors, save time, paper, and space for storing the paper, more responsibility on the carrier to file it correctly. That sounds very sound. Leslie, I want to test out developing a centralized intake system for our office in order to manage project requests, capacity. Oops, now I lost it. And visibility so we can learn how to measure impact and improve customer service. Trace, I want to test out if oil and gas site can be reclaimed with native flora after being P&A'd. This allows for the natural landscape to repair itself, increase fauna populations, store carbon into the ground, and increase aesthetics of the land. We can learn if reclaiming former oil and gas from a rewilding state, if pollutants can be reduced, and if or how much the land recovers. Okay, so after it's been plugged and abandoned, wow. Very interesting. Very interesting. And I'm curious, a lot of these sound, I mean, to me, maybe I'm an easy audience. I like innovation. They sound very reasonable. I'm surprised that you would need, yeah, that it's like, it's sort of something you feel you need to get buy-in on. I mean, these seem really sound to me. Anything you're talking about reducing costs or achieving targets more, or, recovering land, storing carbon, et cetera. These are all goals which are probably core to your department. Deanna says, I want to test out a new way of tracking FMLA cases in order to effectively and proactively manage cases. So we follow rules and regulations, eliminate overpaying and late response. Family medical leave. Thank you. Indeed. Very much, very true, Sandra. Yeah, very true. And the question is always, I think, how, so in my experience, you need enough buy-in to get started, right? If it's a small scale experiment, right? Sometimes it's hard to do small scale experiments with centralized, if you want to do centralized databasing and things like that, you can do some kind of prototype or what have you, but you might need some budget right up front. But in my experience, you're best off starting small. And then what usually happens is if it doesn't work out, no one will remember it. Hopefully you have a little bit of permission to fail. That's hard, I know, in government sectors, but hopefully you have a little bit of that, especially if it's small scale. If it's confined, if you've ring fenced, the impact that this failure would have, right? Then if it's a success, then it's everyone's, credit, right? That's where I try, maybe don't always succeed, but I try. If an experiment works out, I try and back off and go, wow, look how brilliant that is. And definitely how wise of you, dear boss, to have done that. Now, of course, we will take it to scale, right? It's sort of just part of the game. What's that saying? Basically, success has many parents and failure is an orphan. This I find to be very true. So if you start a little bit under the radar, oh, hey, boss. Sorry.
Hello, Gina.
There. I know it's late. I know it's late. Bosses. Okay, you'll see my simplified version of your innovation landscape there. And my prototype here of the formula for how to get buy-in on innovation. That's what we're testing out. Boss is the lead learning designer for the Accelerator Labs. There he is, late night in the Netherlands. Hi, Boss. Thank you so much for joining.
Yeah, just joining for some emotional support.
Oh, thank you. Fabulous. Fabulous. So yeah, we've got colleagues from 6 different states in the US here trying to sort of get buy-in on innovation. So I put together this formula to test out to see if it works. We're just talking a little bit about the tactics of starting small, and then if it's successful, giving credit to others for the success. So please jump in at any point.
Well, I think as you mentioned, working under the radar is often a used tactic as well.
Yeah.
So if it doesn't work, no one is to blame.
Yeah.
If it does work, you have a success to share.
Exactly. There are downsides to that. And sometimes we've also had the problem of being accused of being too small scale, right? Sort of, the people in our organization are like, we work in 170 countries on global poverty, you are coming with these small experiments. So then if you have that problem, you need to sort of, you need to show how the small experiment connects to the bigger system you're trying to change. And that can be tricky too, but that's a good problem to have in a way, because that means you've had a successful experiment and you've carved some kind of permission to test things out. Great. So, all right. So maybe we'll move on a little bit here. I mean, so the next part, again, this is really meant to be valuable for you. So I'm very open to taking this where you want to go. What I can do is tell you a little bit about our experience framing innovation as learning, if that's helpful. Now, this is really sort of next level, as it were. Once you start to do something, you realize how big and complex it is. So if what I'm saying here is not interesting to you, really just, give some kind of feedback in the chat, like, oh, you're losing me, Gina. That's totally fine, because we've really bought into this and we've kind of developed processes and structures around it. Hi, Kate, you want to come in?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think this is great since we are lucky to have kind of 30 minutes at the end in terms of Q&A, like feel free to go through this and pause as folks jump in, and then folks who have questions or project, we can turn off the recording and have a bit more of an off the record conversation with folks after.
Okay, clear. That sounds great. Excellent. All right. So basically, this is a kind of quote that I really, I think it has a lot of wisdom in it. It's from this book, sorry that you can't see because I have my Zoom background on, Thinking in Systems from Donella Meadows, a classic. Basically, it's a quote from Wendell Berry, who was a writer and farmer. And he says, the acquisition of knowledge always involves the revelation of ignorance. Acquiring knowledge almost is that moment when you realize how ignorant you are. And for me, this means when we talk about getting buy-in to innovation by framing it as learning, this quote kind of guides, our efforts and sort of inspires me, right? It's really right, Wendy. And I don't know, what I know is that very often as innovators, you're expected to bring solutions, right? People are like, well, we gave you, you're the innovators, solve it, right? And very often, and it's not the best news, but very often you're going to come back in the early stages with a deeper understanding of the problem or a different understanding of the problem, because you realize now how ignorant you are, right? We had this experience, our project got audited, basically. And we said, okay, one of our goals is to catch up with the pace of change and diversify how we understand problems, right? So we don't only want to use household surveys, we want to use mobile phone data and social media data and satellite data and, all this great stuff. And the auditor said, well, how come you're not using that already? And we said, well, because it's really difficult, because to get access to the mobile phone data, you need a contract with the telecom company, and we don't have lawyers in every office, and it's actually quite hard. And you need data scientists who can then process the data and right? But so it was this weird dance between us telling them about a possibility, and then from an audit perspective, it's often see everything as a deficiency. So why is that not already happening, right? Why do we already why do we not expand our data sources as you're trying to do? So it was a strange knowledge, and I felt in that conversation with the auditors, what we were actually saying to them is, I can't always bring you solutions. I can tell you how wrong your data is. I can tell you how little we know about what's actually going on out there. And I know that's not great news, but it's better than being ignorant. So anyway, so just to sort of point here, wait, I just want to read what Colleen is saying. I have experienced that it's much harder to get buy-in for reporting and technology changes in government, much harder than the private sector. Any advice on how to get support and buy-in specific to government? Exactly. Indeed. So, I mean, I work for the United Nations, which is a, multilateral, multi-government organization. So we are very much in the government space. It is harder probably than the private sector, where the bottom line is very clear. The key performance indicators are very clear. I think here, I'll give maybe some advice at the end, sort of things we've learned along the way on how we've gotten buy-in with governments and with our public institution at the UN. But definitely, it is a little more complex, that's for sure. So, boss, you'll recognize this. So essentially just some of the things that we have done to, a lot of what we've done is to, catch up to the pace of change, try and accelerate learning so that we can adapt, right, to that change. So what we've done is we've embedded these innovation teams close to the purpose of our organization. As I said at the top of this talk, the purpose of our organization is to accelerate these sustainable development goals, which all the governments agreed to. Really critically for the labs, and we can, there's debate as to whether it's best to have innovation teams separate or mainstreamed into the organization, and we can all be innovators. We don't need to have it in our title, but we've created permission to explore, permission to fail, right? Permission to work across silos, etc. And a focus on learning. There's a great quote from Nelson Mandela, who said, "I never fail. I either win or I learn." And I think it's just so brilliant because it is hard in the public sector. It is hard in government. We're dealing with tax dollars and we have an accountability to people, and a big failure can be a big problem. But if we don't have that mandate to explore and experiment, we're just going to keep repeating the same mistakes, right? So that's part of the trick. So indeed, we did bring in these new capabilities into the organization. We provided them with little budgets. They're not big budgets, but it's just enough for them to start something off. And then we connect them, much like you are connected here in this network, in a network. And we put a lot of, we're calling it here infrastructure, because we really do put a lot of time and effort into staying connected with people in whatever form we can. On WhatsApp, like I said, we meet with everybody every Tuesday. Not everybody has to come every Tuesday, but we're there every Tuesday talking to them. We get quite serious about keeping the network alive and keeping the network useful to itself, and showing the network to itself. And that's a big, big part of it, because as Boss always tells me and teaches me, this innovation it's emotional work, it's draining work. There's going to be failures, and you need that network. You need people who can just go too quickly and be like, "Hey, does anybody know how to do this? Have you ever done this? Can I copy it? I need to move fast here." We have a colleague at the University College London who always says, Jeff Mulgan, who always says, we always think of innovators as people who create things. Actually, good innovators also know how to copy very well. So that's also sort of part of it and what you can use the network for. So this is kind of all the structural stuff that we've built around making learning the core of why we do innovation. So again, here, this is where, honestly, if it's too broad scale, I'll run through it. If it's interesting to you, we can talk more about it. But basically, we built this network of innovation labs. We're trying to make it a learning network. So we did a few things. First, we built a prototype, trying to move from a network of teams of innovators to a learning network. What does that mean? What does that look like? We're trying, because we work in a very decentralized way. So all of our innovation labs work on whatever they want to work on, when they want to work on it, and how they want to work on it, which means we're not leading them, we're following them. And we have to put a lot of time and energy in figuring out what they're doing in the first place before we can even get to what are they learning. We do use a little computational science to find the leads and who knows what. And that's why it's helpful to have a data scientist on board. And then we spend a lot of time, and this is way harder than it looks, elevating tacit knowledge, making tacit knowledge explicit, and then trying to understand what's the frontier of what we know. We use learning questions, which are not as academic as research questions, but are kind of aspirational, right? That help us then target what is it that we're trying to learn, right? What's the edge of what everybody knows and where we need to experiment in order to find the answer. The first thing we did is we tried to explain or be able to talk about what kind of knowledge we create. And this is sort of what we came up with. We said, okay, we're figuring out how to do innovation. That's one piece of knowledge we're creating. We also are understanding problems better, right? So, while our stated goal of our organization might be to reduce poverty, it may be very difficult to reduce poverty if, misinformation is traveling faster than fact, right? So, or it may be difficult to reduce poverty when, there's a COVID shutdown and all the markets are closed, right? So what are the weak signals of change? They sound like anecdotal evidence, but they might be signal of a bigger change coming, and they help us catch up to this pace of change. We also produce knowledge on the results of our experiments, and we're not super rigorous about that. We're more quick and dirty than we are like slow and deep. But it's important for us to know, if someone has done an experiment with, we do a lot of work on like segregating waste in different places, separating plastic from organic waste, et cetera. So if they've done one in Vietnam, Ghana can pick up on what they've learned. And then finally, we create a lot of knowledge about what's going on inside the head of the people we're trying to help, right? Their knowledge, their practice, their inventions, their innovations, because they're coming up with a lot as well. So first we tried to articulate what kind of learning are we actually creating? And this is how we get buy-in, because people want to know these things. Then we did our sort of fancy data science, which is not that fancy. We have a lot of chat groups, and we asked for permission, but we look into those chat groups so that we can search the WhatsApp chats and say, okay, is Paraguay talking a lot to Uganda? Well, that's interesting. What are they talking about? Or who's done work on, artificial intelligence, or who's done work on ethnography in remote areas? We can sort of pick up, we can go where the conversation is, rather than forcing our network to take part in what we want. And then we created a learning flow, right? Which the details of this are not important for your purposes, but I think if you are thinking about learning as the objective of innovation, it's important to turn it into a workflow. So for us, what it means is we tell our labs, don't write us boring reports. You don't want to write them. We don't want to read them. Write blogs, right? Then we build this sort of search mechanism so we can search the blogs and figure out, okay, what's everybody working on? Of course, the humans have to read the blogs. And from those blogs, we define learning questions, which we think are at the edge of knowledge of what everybody knows. We do a little bit of trying to connect to academic work to understand what, empirical science knows, but more so it's practically what do we not know and what should we focus on? So just to give you an example of how we started off this work, we started to pick up signals that a lot of our teams were working on informal economies, which is a very big issue in the developing world. Certainly the gig economy and things like that are an issue here in the States, but and economists always thought the richer a country gets, the lower this informal economy will be, right? It happens when the country doesn't have a large economy.
Gina, could you just do a quick definition for folks who may be newer to these terms? Just informal economy. What do you mean when you say that?
I mean, like businesses that are not registered, people that are selling, stuff on their porch, kind of informal vendors, street vendors, people who, before Uber, if they were kind of, not connected to a registered business, this increased a lot, of course, during the pandemic. And honestly, in the places we work, it's like giant, right? It's not like 10%, it's like 90% of the economy is actually unregistered, unregulated, informal in this space. So we started to have this hunch that like, wait a minute, this is everywhere. This is not a small thing. And we looked at our policy, and our policy was basically make the informal formal, right? Register those businesses, go out and get them registered. And we sort of realized, look, it's not exactly possible because there's reasons that they're not registered, right? Either they don't have the capability or they're trying to avoid taxes or, there's something going on here, right? That we can't just fix by going out and getting everybody in a database. So we made this like our learning priority, this issue that we saw emerging. And then we wanted to connect it to something evolving that no one knew the answer to. So if you have, here, this is a picture of like informal taxi service. I think this is maybe Rwanda or something, right? It's kind of like, Uber on a motorcycle with no app, basically. And so we understood that even though this guy who drives this motorcycle is not registered, he's still providing a service. Maybe this is a part of the city that doesn't have buses or other forms of transportation. And the funny thing is, he's also got some WhatsApp chat group, which means he's digitalizing, even though he's informal. So we framed a learning question as, what does going digital mean for these informal businesses? This is a question that when you pose it, nobody actually knows the answer, which is why it invites participation and invites experimentation. We then worked on this for several months and came up with some answers on what does going digital mean for informal economies. And again, it's not important to go into the details of what this is. It's very interesting, and Bas and I and our colleague Tayo did write it up in a blog. But essentially, just to say, we set a question and we tried to experiment our way to get the answer. What we found is that a lot of this is changing into much more market-led, messy, multiple pathways between like having an informal business and getting it registered. It's way messier in the digital economy, for better and worse, right? People are using mobile money transactions, which means they have a record of their work. And sometimes that can be used to extend credit or loans to them. So all of this is totally different, even though they still don't have a registered business. And I wanted to show you this because, again, this is when you're focusing on the result of your innovation being learning. It's not that we need long academic papers to communicate this. And frankly, I don't think anyone in our organization would read or respond to a long academic paper. They barely even read our blogs. But you know what they love? These visuals. They love them, right? So they're like, when we take this to the the economists that we work with, right? They're the specialists on this. And they go, you know something we don't. And I can see it because it's pretty, it's pink and purple. Thank you, boss. And it's clear, right? It's clear. I get that. And I just want to stress that because in making learning the product of innovation, the idea is not to get all academic and fancy and imagine we're going to be published, in academic journals. That won't necessarily bring change in my organization, maybe yours, but not mine. So I'll just close this out. Here's some kind of things we've learned along the way, or things we've learned about learning. And then we can open up for some Q&A. So first, this is literally Boss's mantra. Everything is a prototype. So if you say it that way, it's an incredible protection because you can be under the radar. It's just a prototype, right? I've understood the risks of it. I understand the potential impact of it. It's low cost. And then also what's critical and what I've really learned from working with Boss on this is if everything is a prototype, people like criticizing new ideas, right? So instead of coming to them and being like, I have it all figured out and I am going to now educate you if you would just follow me, you go and you're like, it's a prototype. I mean, we're all trying to make it better, join in. You kind of bring on board the people who could be ideas killers, right? The people who could just shut things down. So it's a really good slogan for like everything. Secondly, and here we're talking about how hard it is to get governments to innovate, right? The best thing you can do is connect. First, you've got to create a mandate to experiment. This is not always easy. but connect that mandate to the core business of your organization, right? So for us, our organization just came up with a new 5-year strategic plan, right? This is our promise to the world. This is what we're doing with the $5 billion a year that is entrusted with us. In that strategic plan, they of course talk about big ideas like systems transformation. They say, okay, for the world to be a more sustainable place, we need to change transport systems and production systems and energy systems. And so we say, well, nobody seems to know how to do systems transformation. Systems transformation is core now to the organization's strategic plan. So I think you're going to need some experimentation, some exploration, some innovation. So we've tried to carve our mandate in the core of the organization to show how it matters for what people actually care about. And then finally, I would say, like, a lot of what I do is tell stories about what the innovation learning has brought to the organization. The storytelling, you've probably heard this elsewhere or worked on this or had other speakers and sessions on this. I can't emphasize enough how important it is. I'm still learning how to do it best. But I've got, in my back pocket, a few stories, depending on the audience, that I can tell that talk about how we changed, how we changed what we do based on the innovation that we're doing. Again, normally people don't care about innovation methods or new things that you might love as a technical expert. They care about sort of the change that it would bring. And I find stories to be much more effective than hard data or facts. We always think, okay, we'll put together a great PowerPoint with lots of charts and graphs and everybody will get on board. Tell them a story in an informal setting, and it works so much better. And then I'm happy to share some of those if that's interesting. Some of my favorite ones that I tell all the time. I'm happy to share those as well in the Q&A. So that's it. That's it from me. And maybe we can open up for Q&A.
Fantastic. And Gina, if you want to pull down your presentation, I'll go ahead and pause just stop the recording.